The phone trembled against calloused skin. "Ryan? They won't let me leave." Sophia's voice cracked through static like autumn ice breaking. 5 silhouettes moved through amber streetlight, circling her car like wolves testing prey. Their laughter drifted across empty asphalt. Cold. Predatory. The wrench slipped from oil-stained fingers, clattering against concrete that had absorbed years of honest sweat. Ryan Mitchell's chest rose once. Fell behind stacked tires and forgotten invoices, a lockbox waited in shadows. Inside, silver dog tags rested against black fabric that smelled of distant sand and gunpowder. His neighbors knew the gentle mechanic who coached Little League and brought casseroles when someone got sick. They'd never seen the operator who'd earned those tags in valleys that swallowed men whole. Tonight, 5 strangers had chosen the wrong woman to corner. Some lessons are written in blood. 2 hours earlier, the Mitchell house had hummed with ordinary magic. Steam rose from 3 bowls of chili, while October rain drummed against kitchen windows. Ryan stirred the pot with the same careful attention he gave everything else, watching Lucas practice multiplication tables at the worn oak table their grandmother had left them. The boy's pencil scratched against paper, tongue poking out in concentration that made Ryan's chest tight with pride. Sophia arrived as she always did, shaking droplets from her auburn hair before hanging her nurse's jacket on the hook by the door. She moved through their space like she belonged there, which she had for the past 14 months. Her fingers found Ryan's shoulder as she passed, a touch so natural it felt like breathing. Lucas looked up from his homework with the grin he saved for 2 people in this world. "Miss Sophia, I got a 95 on my science test." The words tumbled out in a rush of 10-year-old excitement. She pulled the test from his backpack with ceremony, scanning the red teacher comments with mock seriousness that made Lucas bounce in his chair. Outside, wind rattled the old farmhouse, but inside, warmth settled over them like a familiar blanket. Ryan ladled chili into bowls, watching Sophia help Lucas with fractions. Her voice carried the patience that made her exceptional with children, whether in the pediatric ward or at this kitchen table. She caught Ryan staring and smiled, the kind that started in her eyes before reaching her lips. These moments felt stolen somehow, too perfect for a man who'd spent years believing he'd used up his share of good things. The phone call came just as they finished eating. Sophia glanced at the number, frowning slightly before answering. "Hello, Mom." Her voice shifted, becoming careful in the way that meant trouble. Ryan continued clearing dishes, but his attention focused on the conversation's changing rhythm. Something in Sophia's posture made the hair on his neck rise. She hung up after 5 minutes, chewing her lower lip. "My mom's having car trouble again." "That old Buick finally gave up completely." Ryan nodded, already reaching for his keys. Sophia had been helping her mother since her father's passing 2 years ago, and the woman's pride made accepting help a delicate dance. But a broken-down car in this neighborhood after dark wasn't negotiable. "I'll drive you over," Ryan said, but Sophia shook her head. She's embarrassed enough about needing help. A stranger showing up will just make it worse. She was right, of course. Ryan had met Margaret Walsh exactly once, and the woman had spent the entire visit explaining why she didn't need anyone taking care of her. Independence ran in the family like eye color. Lucas looked between them with the sharp awareness kids develop when adults try to hide their worry. "Is Mrs. Walsh okay?" Sophia knelt beside his chair, smoothing his dark hair. "She's fine, sweetheart. Just car trouble. I'll be back before your bedtime story, promise." The boy accepted this with the trust that came from never having that promise broken. Ryan walked Sophia to her car, noting automatically how the streetlight had burned out again. The October air carried the scent of dying leaves and approaching winter. She paused with her hand on the door handle, and something flickered across her face. Fear? No, something else. Like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Everything okay? He asked, stepping closer. Her perfume mixed with the smell of rain and motor oil from his clothes. She nodded quickly, too quickly. Just tired from the hospital. Double shift yesterday. But her eyes held something that made his instincts prickle, the same sixth sense that had kept him alive in places where mistakes meant body bags. She drove away with a wave, tail lights disappearing around the corner toward the older part of town where her mother lived. Ryan stood in the driveway longer than necessary, watching the empty street. Inside, Lucas had already started his homework without being asked, pencil moving across math problems with determined focus. The house felt different with Sophia gone, like a song missing its harmony. Ryan helped Lucas with division, checked his reading assignment, and started the bedtime routine that had become second nature over the past 4 years. But part of his mind stayed with that look in Sophia's eyes, the hesitation before she left. By 8:30, Lucas was asleep, and Ryan sat in his workshop behind the garage, supposedly organizing tools but mostly thinking. The space smelled of oil and metal, familiar as his own skin. This was where he came when the past felt too close, when dreams of sand and cordite made sleeping impossible. Tonight felt like one of those nights, though he couldn't say why. The first call came at 9:15. Sophia's number flashed on his phone, but when he answered, silence greeted him. Then a rustling sound, like fabric against the microphone. His hand tightened on the device. Sophia? More silence. Then the line went dead. He called back immediately. Straight to voicemail. Ryan's workshop suddenly felt too small, too quiet. He tried her number again. Nothing. The rational part of his mind offered explanations. Dead battery, poor reception, accidental dial. But his gut, trained by years of reading situations that could turn lethal in seconds, screamed otherwise. He was reaching for his keys when the second call came through. This time, Sophia's voice was crystal clear, and what he heard made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. Ryan, they won't let me leave. The workshop spun around him as every instinct he'd spent 6 years suppressing roared back to life. Through the phone, he could hear male voices, crude laughter, the sound of footsteps on gravel. Someone was saying something about teaching stuck-up bitches their place. Ryan's vision narrowed to a tunnel, and suddenly he wasn't a small-town mechanic anymore. Where are you? His voice stayed level through pure force of will. Miller's Diner, Sophia whispered. The parking lot. Ryan, I'm scared. The line went dead again, but this time Ryan was already moving. He grabbed the lockbox from behind his workbench, fingers punching in the combination he'd never forgotten. 6 years of peaceful living evaporated like morning mist. The drive to Miller's Diner took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Ryan's hands gripped the steering wheel with the same steady pressure he'd once used on rifle stocks, his mind automatically cataloguing details. 5 men. Sophia had said. Parking lot behind the diner, which meant limited visibility from the street. No witnesses unless someone specifically looked. The dog tags around his neck caught the dashboard light as he took the turn onto Highway 73. He'd put them on without thinking, muscle memory from another life. They felt heavier than he remembered, or maybe that was just the weight of what they represented. 12 years of training. 12 years of being something the government pointed at problems that needed to disappear. Miller's Diner sat at the edge of town like a monument to better times, its neon sign flickering pink against the October darkness. Ryan pulled into the side lot, engine ticking as it cooled. Through the rain-streaked windshield, he could see Sophia's Honda surrounded by 5 figures. Even from 50 yards away, their body language screamed predator. One of them leaned against her driver's side door, trapping her inside. Ryan could see her pale face through the glass, hands pressed against the steering wheel. The man was talking, gesturing with a beer bottle that caught the diner's light. His friends formed a loose circle, blocking any escape route. Ryan stepped out of his truck, and the October air hit him like a slap. Every sense sharpened to combat readiness. He could smell rain, motor oil, and something else. Fear. It rolled off the Honda in waves, and underneath it, the metallic tang that always preceded violence. The nearest man noticed him first, nudging his companion with an elbow. "Hey, looks like we got an audience." His voice carried the casual arrogance of someone who'd never faced real consequences. Ryan kept walking, hands loose at his sides, gait easy. To them, he probably looked like exactly what they expected. Middle-aged mechanic, soft around the edges, someone who'd call the cops and wait for help. "Evening, gentlemen." Ryan's voice carried just enough small-town friendliness to sound unthreatening. "That's my girlfriend you're talking to. Mind if I ask what's going on?" The leader, a thick-set man with prison tattoos crawling up his forearms, turned to face him fully. His grin showed too many teeth, none of them kind. "Your girlfriend?" He looked Ryan up and down, taking in the work clothes and grease-stained hands. "Well, ain't that something? Tell you what, Pops. Why don't you head on back to your truck and forget you saw anything here? This don't concern you." Ryan stopped 20 feet away, close enough to move if needed, far enough to assess the threat. 5 men, all younger than him, all carrying themselves like they'd seen the inside of county lockup. The leader had a knife clipped to his belt. Another one kept his right hand in his jacket pocket. Gun, probably. The other 3 were muscle, big enough to intimidate civilians, but soft around the middle from beer and bad choices. "Actually, it does concern me." Ryan's tone stayed conversational, almost apologetic. "See, Sophia there is supposed to help my son with his homework tonight. He's going to be real disappointed if she doesn't make it home." He could see Sophia's face through the car window, eyes wide with something between hope and terror. The leader laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. "Homework? That's real sweet, old man. But your little teacher here needs to learn some manners. She thinks she's too good to give us her number. Too good to be friendly." He slapped the car window with his palm, making Sophia flinch. "We're just helping her understand how things work around here." Ryan's expression never changed, but something shifted in his posture. Subtle, imperceptible to anyone who hadn't spent years reading body language in life-or-death situations. His weight settled differently on his feet. His hands, which had been hanging loose, found positions that looked casual, but could become lethal in a heartbeat. "I appreciate you taking the time to educate her," Ryan said mildly. "But I think she's learned enough for one night. Why don't you boys head on home? No harm done." The leader's grin widened, showing gold teeth that glinted in the diner's neon. Behind him, his friends spread out slightly, sensing the change in dynamics, even if they couldn't identify it. "No harm done?" The leader pushed off from Sophia's car, beer bottle dangling from his fingers. See, that's where you're wrong, Pops. Harm's already been done. Your girl here insulted us, hurt our feelings. That kind of thing requires an apology. A real personal one, if you know what I mean. Ryan nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this reasonable request. I understand. Nobody likes to have their feelings hurt. He took a step closer, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. But here's the thing. You've got about 10 seconds to step away from that car, get in your vehicle, and drive away. After that, things are going to get complicated. The leader's laughter turned ugly. Complicated? For who? He raised the beer bottle like a club, and his friends closed ranks behind him. 5 against 1 in a dark parking lot. They liked those odds. They had no idea they were about to learn why odds don't matter when you're facing someone who used to hunt terrorists for a living. For you? Ryan said quietly. The dog tags around his neck caught the light as he moved, silver metal that suddenly seemed significant. See, you picked the wrong woman to threaten. And you definitely picked the wrong man to threaten her in front of. The first one came at him swinging the bottle in a wide arc that telegraphed its path like a road sign. Ryan ducked under it, his body moving with the fluid precision of someone who'd practiced these motions 10,000 times. His right hand caught the man's wrist, twisted, and suddenly the bottle was gone, and the leader was on his knees, arm bent at an angle that made his friends take a step back. Jesus Christ, one of them breathed. One of Forststoa. Who the hell are you? Ryan looked down at the man kneeling in the gravel, whimpering about his probably broken wrist. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Someone you should have walked away from. The one with his hand in his jacket pocket made the mistake of reaching for what Ryan already knew was there. The gun was halfway out when Ryan moved, closing the distance faster than thought. A sharp strike to the wrist, another to the elbow, and the weapon clattered across the parking lot like unwanted trash. Its owner followed it down, clutching his arm and cursing in language that would have made his mother reach for soap. 3 left. They looked at each other, then at their friends on the ground, then at Ryan, who stood between them and Sophia's car like something carved from granite. The bravest of the remaining 3, a kid who couldn't have been older than 25, stepped forward with fists raised like he'd seen in movies. You think you're tough, old man. Let's see how tough you are when... Ryan moved again. Not flashy, not brutal, just efficient. The kid's words turned into a grunt of expelled air as he folded around Ryan's fist, then crumpled to the gravel like discarded laundry. The last 2 looked at their friend's leader with a broken wrist, gunman clutching his arm, tough kid gasping for breath, and made the first smart decision of their evening. They ran. Actual running. Feet slapping against asphalt as they headed for their beat-up Camaro, parked at the lot's edge. Ryan watched them go, then turned his attention to the 3 still on the ground. The leader was trying to get to his feet, cradling his wrist against his chest. When he saw Ryan looking at him, he froze like a rabbit spotting a hawk. "You broke my goddamn wrist," he said, voice pitched high with pain and disbelief. Ryan knelt beside him, close enough that only the leader could hear his words. When he spoke, his tone was conversational, almost friendly. That's the least of your problems right now. See, I know who you are, Marcus Webb. I know where you live on Elm Street, above the pawn shop. I know you've got 2 strikes and can't afford a 3rd. I also know that if I ever see you within a mile of my girlfriend again, they'll need dental records to identify what's left. The leader's face went white as fresh paint. Who are you? Ryan's smile was colder than the October wind. Someone who keeps track of things. Someone who has friends who keep track of things. Someone you really, really don't want to see again. He stood, brushing dirt from his knees with the same care he used to clean engine parts. The other two men were struggling to their feet, helping each other like wounded animals. Ryan looked at them with the mild interest of someone watching an ant farm. "You boys have a choice," he said, loud enough for all three to hear. "You can get in whatever car brought you here, drive away, and forget this ever happened. Or you can stick around and find out what 12 years in Delta Force teaches a man about anatomy." He paused, letting that sink in. "I'm betting you'll make the smart choice." The leader, Marcus Webb, looked at Ryan with new understanding dawning in his eyes. The dog tags weren't jewelry. The calm wasn't weakness. This wasn't some small-town mechanic who'd gotten lucky. This was something else entirely. Something that had been pretending to be human until circumstances made pretending impossible. "Delta Force," Webb whispered, like the words burned his mouth. Ryan nodded once, sharp and economical. 12 years, 3 tours, more confirmed kills than you've got fingers and toes. The temperature in the parking lot seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "So what's it gonna be, boys?" They chose wisely. All three limped toward the Camaro, the one with the possibly broken ribs leaning heavily on his friends. Ryan watched them go, memorizing faces, license plates, the way they moved when they thought they weren't being watched. Old habits died hard, and some habits were worth keeping alive. The Camaro's engine turned over on the third try, coughed black smoke into the October air, and carried its occupants into the darkness beyond the diner's neon glow. Ryan stood in the sudden quiet, listening to the night sounds return. Crickets, wind through dying leaves, the distant hum of traffic on the interstate. Behind him, Sophia's car door opened with a soft click. He turned to find her standing beside the Honda, keys clutched in hands that shook like autumn leaves. Her nurse's training showed in how she checked him for injuries, professional assessment overriding personal fear. "Are you hurt?" Her voice was steady, but he could see the questions building behind her eyes. Ryan shook his head, then pulled her close, feeling her heart beat against his chest, like a wild bird trying to escape. She smelled like hospital antiseptic and fear sweat, but underneath that, still like the woman who helped his son with homework and made their house feel like home. "I'm fine," he said into her hair. "They won't bother you again." Sophia pulled back to look at him, searching his face for answers to questions she wasn't sure she wanted to ask. In the diner's neon light, his features looked different somehow. Harder, like seeing a familiar photograph from a new angle. "Ryan, what you just did, how did you—" She stopped, reorganizing her thoughts. "Those men had weapons." "There were 5 of them. You could have been killed." He guided her toward her car, one hand on her lower back, the other scanning the parking lot with automatic vigilance. "Could have been," he agreed. "Wasn't, though. It was deflection disguised as reassurance, and they both knew it." Sophia got into her car, but didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, she sat behind the wheel, looking at him through the open door with an expression he couldn't quite read. "We need to talk," she said finally. Ryan nodded, knowing this conversation had been inevitable since the moment he'd put those dog tags back around his neck. "Tomorrow, after Lucas goes to school." She studied his face for another long moment, then reached out to touch the silver chain visible at his collar. "Military?" she asked. He caught her hand, held it gently. "Was. Long time ago." Her fingers traced the edge of the dog tags, reading the raised letters in the dark. When she looked at him again, something had changed in her expression. Not fear, exactly. More like recognition. "Delta Force," she read aloud. That's special operations, isn't it?" Ryan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It was. Now I'm just a mechanic who loves you and wants you to get home safe." Sophia started her car, but kept her eyes on his face. "Just a mechanic," she repeated, but her tone suggested she was testing the words, seeing how they felt. "Right. And I'm just a nurse who happened to fall in love with someone who can take apart 5 armed men like they were broken engines." She put the car in drive, then looked at him one more time. "Tomorrow, Ryan. We talk about everything." He watched her drive away, tail lights disappearing around the same corner they'd vanished behind 2 hours ago. This time felt different, though. This time, she was driving away with knowledge that would change everything between them, and he wasn't sure if that was good or bad. The parking lot felt enormous with just him standing in it. Ryan walked back to his truck, noting automatically how his hands weren't shaking, how his breathing hadn't changed, how his heart rate had already returned to normal. 6 years of civilian life, and his body still remembered what it was like to be a weapon. The drive home gave him time to think, which might have been a mistake. In 12 minutes, he'd gone from small-town dad to something else entirely. The question was whether he could go back, or if that part of his life was over for good. Some doors, once opened, didn't close again. Lucas was still asleep when Ryan checked on him, sprawled across his twin bed with math homework scattered on the nightstand. The boy's face looked peaceful in the glow from his nightlight, unmarked by the knowledge that his father had just hurt 3 men in a diner parking lot. Ryan pulled the blanket up to his son's chin, then stood in the doorway for a long moment, memorizing the scene. In his own bedroom, Ryan sat on the edge of the bed he'd shared with Sophia for the past 6 months, dog tags heavy around his neck. Through the window, the October night looked exactly the same as it had 3 hours ago, but everything had changed. The man who'd left this house to help with a broken-down car wasn't the same one who'd come back. Sleep didn't come easily. When it finally did, Ryan dreamed of sand and cordite, of places where the wrong decision meant body bags and flag-draped coffins. He dreamed of a life he'd thought was over, and woke up wondering if it had ever really ended at all. Morning brought coffee and pancakes and Lucas chattering about a field trip to the Science Museum. Normal sounds in a normal kitchen, but Ryan felt like he was watching it through bulletproof glass. Sophia arrived just as Lucas was grabbing his backpack, punctual as always, but something had changed in how she looked at him. After Lucas left for school, they sat at the kitchen table with cooling coffee between them. Sophia's hands wrapped around her mug like she was trying to draw warmth from it, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady but careful. "Tell me about Delta Force," she said. Not a question, a request. Ryan stared into his coffee, seeing reflections of a past he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself it was someone else's life. "What do you want to know?" He kept his tone neutral, but inside, something was unraveling. 12 years of marriage to the job, 4 years of raising Lucas alone, 14 months of believing he could be just a mechanic who fixed cars and coached Little League. "Everything," Sophia said. I want to know who you really are. So he told her. About the recruitment at 19, fresh out of high school with no direction and too much anger. About the training that broke him down and rebuilt him into something harder, sharper, more focused. About missions in countries most people couldn't find on a map. About targets who disappeared in the night and never made the news. He told her about Sarah, Lucas's mother, who'd married a soldier and died in a car accident while he was overseas. About coming home to a 4-year-old who barely remembered him. About choosing between the job and the boy who needed a father more than the country needed another operator. I retired, he said, stirring coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Hung up the uniform, moved here, opened the garage. Thought I could be normal. Thought I could be the kind of man who helped with homework and went to PTA meetings and never had to hurt anyone again. Sophia listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When he finished, the kitchen felt hollow, like a stage after the curtain falls. Outside, October wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Normal sounds in a normal world that suddenly felt very far away. Do you regret it? She asked finally. Last night, I mean, what you did to those men. Ryan considered the question, surprised to find he didn't need to think about the answer. No, he said. They were going to hurt you. Maybe worse. I couldn't let that happen. Sophia nodded slowly, like she'd expected that response. And if they come back? If there are others like them? Ryan's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. They won't come back. And if they do, they'll wish they hadn't. She stood then, walking to the window that looked out over their small backyard. From behind, Ryan could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful way she held herself. When she turned back to him, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the effort it cost her. Are you dangerous? Not to me, not to Lucas, but... Are you someone I should be afraid of? The question hung between them like smoke. Ryan stood, crossing to where she waited by the window. When he reached for her hands, she let him take them, but her fingers felt cold despite the coffee mug's warmth. I'm dangerous to people who threaten my family, he said quietly. I'm dangerous to people who hurt innocent people. I'm dangerous to people who think they can take what they want because they're bigger or stronger or meaner. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But I'm not dangerous to you. I'll never be dangerous to you. Sophia searched his face, looking for lies or half-truths, or the kind of promises men make when they're desperate. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, because some of the tension left her shoulders. Okay, she said simply. Okay. They stood together in the morning light, holding hands like teenagers, while outside their normal world continued its normal routine. But something fundamental had shifted between them, like tectonic plates settling into new positions. What happens now? Ryan asked. Sophia's smile was small but real, the first genuine expression he'd seen from her all morning. Now you teach me how to change the oil in my car, and tonight you help Lucas with his homework, like always. And we figure out how to be normal people who happen to have some very abnormal skills. It wasn't the answer he'd expected, but it was the one he needed. They spent the morning in the garage, Sophia's hands getting dirty for the first time as Ryan guided her through basic maintenance. She was a quick learner, asking smart questions and remembering everything he showed her. By afternoon, something like normalcy had returned. Lucas came home full of stories about dinosaur bones and planetarium shows, and they fell back into their familiar routine. Homework at the kitchen table, Sophia's patient voice explaining fractions, Ryan starting dinner while keeping one ear on their conversation. But that night, after Lucas was asleep and they were alone in the bedroom, Sophia traced the dog tags where they lay against Ryan's chest and asked the question he'd been dreading. "Will you teach me?" Her voice was barely a whisper in the dark. Not the killing, but how to protect myself, how to be ready if something like last night happens again. Ryan's first instinct was to say no, to wrap her in cotton and keep her as far from that world as possible. But then he remembered the fear in her voice on the phone, the helplessness he'd felt during those 12 minutes of driving, not knowing if he'd arrive in time. Teaching her to defend herself wouldn't make her a soldier, but it might keep her alive if he wasn't there to protect her. "Basic self-defense," he said finally. "Situational awareness. How to get away from trouble, not how to find it." Sophia's smile was invisible in the dark, but he could feel it against his chest. "Deal," she whispered. The next few weeks settled into a new kind of normal. Ryan still fixed cars and coached Lucas's little league team. Sophia still worked her shifts at the hospital and helped with homework. But now their evenings sometimes included lessons in the garage, Sophia learning to read body language and escape holds, to use her keys as weapons and her voice as a deterrent. She was a natural student, picking up techniques with the same methodical precision she brought to nursing. Ryan found himself falling in love with her all over again, watching her transform from victim to someone who would never be helpless again. The men from that night at Miller's diner never came back. Word got around, the way it does in small towns, that the quiet mechanic wasn't as quiet as he seemed. People started treating Ryan with a new kind of respect, part gratitude and part wariness. He didn't mind. Respect was easier to live with than pity. Lucas never learned the details of what happened that October night, but children see more than adults think they do. He started walking a little taller, talking about his dad with a pride that hadn't been there before. When kids at school asked what his father did for a living, Lucas would say, "He fixes things that are broken," with the confidence of someone who'd seen proof. 6 months later, on a spring evening when the air smelled like apple blossoms and new grass, Ryan found Sophia in their backyard, watching Lucas practice the baseball swing they'd been working on. The boy's form was getting better, more confident, and his laughter carried across the yard like music. "Happy?" Ryan asked, settling beside her on the porch steps. Sophia leaned against his shoulder, solid and warm and real. "Happy?" she confirmed. "But I have a question." Ryan tensed slightly, old habits dying hard. "What's that?" "When do I get to meet the rest of your team?" The question caught him off guard, and he turned to look at her. Sophia's expression was serious, but her eyes held a glint of something that might have been mischief. "My team?" "Come on," she said, nudging him with her elbow. 12 years in Delta Force. And you want me to believe you didn't form some bonds? That there aren't other ex-operators out there who might want to meet the woman who tamed the legendary Ryan Mitchell? Ryan's laugh was rusty from disuse, but it felt good. Legendary? Sophia's grin was wicked. "Oh, honey. Did you think word wouldn't get around about what happened at Miller's? About who you used to be?" She gestured toward the house. "Half the town's afraid of you now, and the other half wants to buy you drinks." "And you?" Ryan asked. "Which half are you?" Sophia's answer came in the form of a kiss, soft and sure and tasting like the future they were building together. When they broke apart, her eyes were bright with love and laughter and something that looked like pride. "I'm the half that gets to go home with you every night," she said. "I'm the half that knows the man behind the legend. And I'm the half that's not the least bit surprised that when push came to shove, you were exactly who I needed you to be." They sat together as the sun set behind the old oak tree that had watched over this house for 50 years. Lucas's laughter echoed across the yard, and somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour. Normal sounds in a normal evening, but Ryan knew he'd never take normal for granted again. Some people spend their whole lives looking for their purpose. Ryan had found his twice. First as a soldier, protecting his country from enemies most people never knew existed. Then as a father and partner, protecting the small, perfect world he'd built from anyone who might threaten it. Both jobs required the same skills, it turned out: vigilance, dedication, the willingness to stand between the people you love and whatever darkness might come for them. The only difference was the uniform. Tonight, in a backyard that smelled like spring and sounded like home, Ryan Mitchell was exactly where he belonged. And if anyone ever threatened that again, well, they'd learn what his neighbors already knew. Some lessons really are written in blood.